Hey everyone, welcome to Vanished X. Tonight we're taking a terrifying ride into 5 true stories of elevators gone wrong, strange disappearances, eerie moments, and rides that should never have happened. This is a brand new channel, and your support really helps us grow. Many people watch but forget to subscribe, and then they miss the next upload. By subscribing, you won't just stay updated, you'll also help more horror fans discover these chilling tales. So, step inside. The doors are closing, and let's descend into the darkness together. I worked nights at CityView General for 3 years. If you've ever done night shift in a hospital, you already know the feeling. Like the building belongs more to the vents and the blue glow under doorways than to the people inside it. The key. Cafeteria is closed. The volunteer desk is empty, and the wide, polished floors seem too big for the handful of souls still moving through them. I was a security officer, which is a generous way of saying I walked in a loop, checked that doors were locked, signed for deliveries, and tried to look calm when family members cried in public. My station was a high counter near the East Wing elevators. From there I could see the hallway to radiology, the vending machines, and the glass doors that led to the service corridor down to the basement. Laundry, supply, the oxygen cage. If you stood there long enough, the building taught you its habits. Which door made a click even when it didn't open, which ice machine sounded like someone quietly knocking, which light flickered when the air handlers kicked on. We called it the empty descent. The first time I heard about the East elevator, I thought the nurses were messing with me. Wait up for 317, Mira told me, winding a blood pressure cuff onto a rolling stand. She was a float nurse on med-surg, kind eyes, always, a pot of strong tea cooling on the counter. The East elevator goes down to the basement by itself. Doors open, they don't close until it's done. She shrugged at her own story. That's all. Rafi, the night custodian, laughed and said, "Ask who's riding it." He had a way of making every sentence sound like the punchline was, "On you." Cameras show things. Hospitals are cemeteries with better lighting. Nobody says it out loud, but you feel it. There's a pressure in the quiet, made of all the things that didn't go right. Still, I walked past the East Bank without thinking about it for weeks. My route took me down to the basement every hour. Concrete block walls, gray paint, a gurney parked against the same section of cinder block, a supply cage that never seemed fully locked. It smells like cold metal down there, and the floor hums a little from the big equipment. Not one sound exactly, but a layer under every other noise, like a refrigerator running in a quiet apartment. On the night it started for me, I was logging a property return for a patient who'd been moved to room 409 the day before and didn't make it. I only remember the number because the son kept repeating it, asking everyone within reach if his mother was still there, still in 409, as if the number could hold her in place. She passed at 1:12 a.m. I initialed the sheet that said so. Her son threw a chair, then apologized to it. "You see worse, but you don't see much sadder." I was at the end of my loop at 3:12, sipping burnt coffee from a styrofoam cup, when the East elevator dinged. Just that. One polite chime, like it had been called. There was no one in the hallway. The panel above the doors lit B for basement, even though the car was already at G. I watched it slide to B, and then the doors opened. Cold. Air puffed out like someone cracked a freezer. The light inside looked the same sterile white as always, but the stainless walls had that wavering, watery look you see over hot asphalt. I looked down at my phone because it buzzed. A text from Mira. Look at the time. It was 3:17 a.m. The doors stayed open, untouched by any hand. After a minute, they closed, and the car returned to G on its own. In the hallway, nothing had changed, but the skin on my arms felt too tight, the way it does when someone stands too close behind you. The next night, Mira waved me over to the nurse's station at 3:10. She had the East elevator camera pulled up on one of the small black and white monitors. We weren't supposed to use them for ghost hunting, but Kelsey, the night charge nurse, pretended not to notice. Kelsey's rule was simple: If it doesn't hurt a patient and it keeps you awake, she isn't looking. It started after the last remodel, Mira said, sipping tea. Before that, the morgue had its own lift. Now it's the same bank. Wiring's weird. Basement drafts, I said. Air pulls. You'll see, Raffi said, pushing a yellow mop bucket past us like a parade float. They don't get off. He didn't smile when he said it. At 3:16, the camera showed the empty car at G. At exactly 3:17, the B lit. The car hummed and the doors opened to the blank cement hall. A gurney sat across the way, straps down, linen folded like a napkin. Nothing moved, but the lens had a faint distortion, like heat above a road. If you stared into that ripple, shapes hinted at themselves. An elbow, the turn of a head, the idea of a shoulder sliding past the frame. Inside the car, the little weight indicator flickered up a notch, then another, as if calculating visitors it couldn't quite count. No one pressed the close button. The doors stayed open 120 seconds, then shut. We printed the controller log in the facility's office. It showed a basement run with no hall call, impossible unless someone pressed B from inside. At 3:18:19, door relays hold open. No close command until 3:20. On paper, it was nothing. In person, it felt like waiting for someone who refused to make eye contact. Once you notice a thing like that, you can't unsee it. The elevator dinged at 3:17 the next night and the next. In between, the hospital kept being a hospital, a psycho. Patient wanted to sign out AMA. A drunk man slept in a lobby chair. A med cart jammed. But 3:10 to 3:25 turned into a pocket of time I planned around. I took my break there. I stood by the east bank pretending not to listen. Petty as it sounds, I wanted to prove to myself I wasn't waiting for a ghost, which is pretty much what waiting for a ghost is. I told Dennis from maintenance because Dennis believes everything has a cause you can point at with a wrench. He said the controller was old and maybe a relay was sticking. He opened the panel with a triangular key, paged through codes. "There's a ghost job scheduled," he said, cheerful like he'd found a loose bolt he could tighten. "Unknown. Destination. Time's out after 1:20. That's your door hold." "That's not a real term," I said. "It is when someone typed it." He looked at me the way people look at a person who doesn't want to be alone. "You working tonight?" We wiped the job at 2:30, ran the car up and down, opened and closed doors manually, put it in independent service and back. Everything behaved. At 3:17, it dropped to B, opened, and waited while no one in particular boarded. Dennis didn't joke. He just stood there with the panel open, green LED reflected in his glasses like the machine was writing on his eyes. "Okay," he said finally, like a man accepting bad weather. "Then it's a network thing." On the fourth night, I smelled it for the first time. It rode up with the cold air, lilies and old carpet, funeral home suite. It's not a smell. We stock in the basement. That same night, the camera flare showed a shoulder clear enough that I didn't have to squint to see it. A second shape slid behind it. The weight indicator ticked upward, paused, then dropped a few pounds like someone had leaned a bag against the rail. My brain kept trying to turn it into a reflection. The only problem was the numbers. Reflections don't weigh 20 pounds. Somewhere in there, the rumor settled into shape. They're from 409. Raffi said it like he was already sick of hearing himself, but once the number is in your head, it starts lining up on its own. We lost patience on other floors. The car still moved at 3:17. When 409 was empty, it still moved. When it was occupied, it still moved. The rumor wasn't a map. It was a door we could shut if we needed to. On a Monday in March, the son from 409 came back. He walked straight to the East Bank and stood there like a person who knows exactly where to wait. I was at the desk. He didn't look at me. He let the West car come and go without moving. When the East car arrived, he didn't step in. He put his hand inside the A, opening, palm up like he was feeling for rain. He was calm the way grief gets when it runs out of places to burn. "Does it come by itself?" he asked, still looking into the empty car. "What does?" I said, because naming a thing makes it louder. "The elevator," he said. "After." 3. He had the face of someone trying to remember school instructions while somebody shouts nearby. They told me. I thought it was a joke. Old building, I said. We get weird drafts. He nodded toward the car. My mom hated elevators, he said. When I was a kid, she'd take the stairs and make me race her. After my dad left, sometimes we'd go for midnight drives just to see if the city was still there. She'd point at lights and say, "That one's our star." He looked down the hall like he was giving her a head start. "I think she's practicing," he said. For a longer ride. He came at 3:10 every night for a week and never stepped in. I didn't stop him. Maybe I didn't want to be the person who blocked the only ritual that let him sleep. Maybe I wanted something to acknowledge him so I didn't have to. Nothing did. The elevator did what it did. The lilies came and went. If there were shapes, they were patient like good patients waiting for orders. On Thursday, the cardiology team paged a code at 3:05. The overhead voice said, "Code blue, 4 south, room," and cut out. Crackle then. Code blue, 4. South 40, and silence. Everyone heard the 40. Mira and I did not say the rest. Some numbers you don't say when they're already in the room. At 3:17, the east car opened but didn't descend. It stayed at G with its doors wide like it was reversing the route to let something out. The wait light blipped up and down. I stood too close and felt pressure on the toe of my shoe. The soft thump of a rubber bumper brushing leather. My eyes watered from a cold that burned. After that moment, I stopped calling it wiring. I told Dennis I wanted to ride. He recited insurance and OSHA until the words were just a row of letters. I let him finish, then said, "I'm going to do it anyway." He stared at me a long time and finally said, very quietly, "Then I'm going too." Mira made me text her when I got out. She slipped an extra roll of tape into my pocket like it might help. Rafi refused to be in the hallway. He said something in Urdu that sounded like a prayer and an insult at the same time. At 3:14, I got in the east car and pressed B. The doors closed in a sharper voice like they'd been waiting to show me a setting I hadn't earned. It went down as smooth as always. When the doors opened, the basement looked exactly like itself. Gray paint, concrete, the gurney in the usual place, the finicky padlock hanging wrong on the supply cage. A deep humming reached through my shoes. I stepped one pace into the hall and felt the temperature change as if I'd crossed an invisible line. Dennis held the door with his foot and said, "Say when." I turned to tell him I was fine. The hallway lights hiccuped just a breath. Somewhere far down, something rolled, a single clack of plastic against tile. I listened hard. The sound came again, closer, the wobble thump of a bad cartwheel hitting. The same bad spot once per turn. My knee forgot how to bend. The air behind me drew in cool like the elevator car had become a lung. "Back in," Dennis said. His voice had lost its pretend. The floor indicator above the door cycled, 4, then 0, then 9, without the car moving. I laughed in that way people laugh when a roller coaster pauses upside down and a bored voice says, "Happens sometimes." I pressed G. The button felt like a sticker, it didn't light. "Independent?" Dennis asked the panel more than me. He turned the key. It resisted, like the lock was painted on. He turned harder. Nothing. There are noises you hear only. In an elevator that's not doing what it should. A relay starved for power ticks like a metronome. A motor under load sings in a straight line. I heard neither. Instead, there was a sound like someone turning pages very slowly, and under it a whisper shaped like speech but not made of words. The wait light flicked up a notch, then another. Dennis moved to the corner as if he were making room for a polite stranger. "We're full," he said, then winced at himself. "Kidding." The doors opened without permission. Behind them wasn't the hallway we knew. It was the same corridor, but earlier or later, same gray paint, fresher, an old exit, sign without the running man. Cleaner lines like no cart had ever kissed them. The air was colder and the sweet smell was stronger. Lilies without the pretense of being anything else. A bed rolled past at waist height. sheet tight as a drum. There was a shape under the sheet in the familiar outline the eyes refused to focus on. The bed did not squeak. Wheels made that smooth hiss you only get when equipment is new. The weight light ticked down in time with it gliding away. Back, Dennis said. Not to me. Maybe to the building. Maybe to the part of this that keeps the limits. The bed kept going. A second bed followed. Then a wheelchair, empty, footrests, down. The seat had a shallow dip as if someone had just stood from it. The car thought it lost 20 pounds. I stuck my hand out and touched the corridor wall. The paint was rougher, like it needed another coat. When I pulled back, my palms smelled like dust and flowers. We're getting out, I said, because the third option was letting the doors close and ride to wherever 409 was, and every part of me understood that wasn't a place you leave easily. You can try, Dennis said, not unkind. He put a hand in the middle of my back and pushed me into the corridor like a dad steering a kid across a street. He stepped out with me. The car stayed open behind us, a white rectangle of light on the floor. The corridor went on longer than it should. In the real basement, there's a turn about 60 feet down. Here it kept going until the lines wanted to meet. The hum was deeper, like the building wasn't humming so much as something placed inside it was, an object on a table we couldn't see. We passed doorways. The numbers were wrong in all the right ways. 409 stenciled on a supply closet, 409 stamped on an electrical room, Ear 409 printed on a fire hose cabinet. Every number wanted to be that number. My mouth flooded like I was going to be sick. Where the loading dock door should have been, a steel door stood ajar. Cold flowed from the gap like a dog testing air under a fence. A white tag hung from a hook beside it. A body tag, the paper kind with a string loop. No handwriting, just lines waiting. I picked it up without deciding to. It felt heavy for paper, weighted by what it was for. Dennis took it out of my hand, clipped it back and said, "No." Then gentle like to a child who just stepped off a curb, "You can't take that with you." From far down the hall, rubber on tile, smooth and fast. The overhead speaker, dead in our hallway for as long as I worked there, crackled to life. A voice, or something wearing the shape of a voice, said, "Transport to 409. And the words didn't come from the speaker. They were simply everywhere at once. Dennis grabbed my sleeve. We ran. The light from the car seemed too far, away for how little we'd walked. The air made my eyes water and the tears didn't fall. They hung at the edge of seeing like the start of a different kind of vision. The cold behind the metal door didn't move. It waited. The tag on its hook spun once and faced us like a name badge in a mirror. We reached the car. Dennis shoved me inside and slammed both hands to the doors like he could force them shut faster. The wheels of something big hissed half the distance between the steel door and us. The weight light spiked high enough to blink. A smell hit me like a memory of a day that hasn't happened yet. Alcohol swab, hot dust, powdered gloves. The doors closed. The panel went blank. Then the numbers came back all at once, the way a heart stutters and finds itself. The car rose. The doors opened to our hallway, our scuffed paint, our lazy padlock. We stepped out and leaned against opposite walls, staring at nothing until our breathing remembered how. On the camera, it looked boring. 2 men in front of an elevator that opened to a normal basement. If you watched right at the close, there was an extra second of delay, like the doors had been asked to hold for somebody polite who didn't want to push. The log said, "Door hold, 120 seconds. Unknown destination, cleared." It read like a problem that had solved itself without caring we were in the middle of it. I made it to shift change. At 7:05, Mira handed me a muffin she said she baked. I ate it without tasting. The son from 409 came by at 8, hair damp like he'd finally showered. "Did it do it?" he asked, like asking about the weather. I said yes. He nodded, almost grateful, as if the world being consistent was the best he could hope for. Then he said, "I dreamed she was trying to press a button she couldn't reach," and showed me his hand like it should mean something to me that his fingers were shaking. I quit 2 months later. Not because of the elevator, not officially, I got a city job where people threaten lawsuits instead of standing in doorways quietly. We moved to an apartment across town. I started sleeping like a person again. But my body wakes on its own at 3:16, 1 minute early like it has a meeting. I get up, stand in the kitchen doorway and listen for wheels that aren't there. Some nights I laugh at myself and make tea. Some nights I look at the oven clock until 3:17 ticks over and feel a pressure in the room let go in a way I can't explain. Last winter I went back to City View to pick up tax forms. The day clerk handed me an envelope and a pen like I might need to sign for it. My feet did an old loop on my way out because habit is a kind of gravity. At the East Bank there was a fresh, out-of-service sign taped to the East car. Dennis's handwriting. I pressed the button for the West car and felt stupid relief when it came fast. Before I stepped in, the East car dinged behind its cardboard sign. The doors didn't open, just a single chime that sounded like a throat clearing. I don't remember crossing the lobby, but suddenly I was outside, breathing cold air hard enough to taste metal. An older woman with a flowered scarf rode up with me in the West car. She had the look we all get when we've been to a hospital too many times too close together. "Wrong one?" she asked, nodding at the signed-off car. "Yeah," I said. "That one's weird." She smiled in that sharp way older women do when something is foolish and also true. "They used to tell us not to take that one," she said, "before they fixed the wing. They'd say, 'Don't ride the one that goes down at night.'" She got off on 3. After she left, the car smelled faintly like lilies, which is probably just my brain blaming her perfume for things it can't file. That night at home, I woke at 3:16. I didn't get up. I watched the ceiling and listened to the apartment. The building has an elevator. I live on the second floor and never think about it. The shaft shares a wall with the bedroom. When the clock turned 3:17, the wall hummed in a way I'd never noticed. Subtle, like electricity going somewhere it belongs. It sounded exactly like a car taking power for a run. It was probably someone coming home late 2 floors up. Still, I lay there counting 120 in my head. At 120, the hum eased. I've done that more nights than I'll admit. Every so often, someone from the old crew texts me a rumor. East car out again. New camera sees through the flare. Guy in facility says there's a sub-basement room on the blueprints that isn't there in real life. I tell myself that if there were a sub-basement, we would have found it the night Dennis and I stepped into the wrong corridor. I tell myself lots of things. Most of them sound reasonable until 3:17. People ask if I believe in ghosts, like it's a team you join. I think hospitals collect stories, and sometimes the story keeps going after the person leaves. Maybe the East car is just a story with electricity, carrying practice runs or regrets. If you asked for proof, I could show you logs and clips that don't prove anything. I could show you a key that turns, and a number that doesn't exist on any map. I could tell you exactly how lilies smell when they don't belong. I could tell you what it feels like when the air around your shoe thinks a bumper touched it and nothing did. 2 mornings ago, Mira sent me a photo from the nurse's station, a printout of the controller log with the usual line, "Door hold 120s." Underneath, in faint pencil, someone had written, 3:17, patients to 4:09. There was a smiley face next to it, the sarcastic kind people draw so they don't have to say they're scared. 5 minutes later, she texted, "Kelsey says delete that. Not funny." Then, I did. I didn't answer. I sat at my kitchen table in the dark and listened to my own refrigerator hum. I realized I was waiting for it to line up with a time that only means something to a hallway I don't work in anymore. I thought about the son from 409, standing with his hand out, feeling the air inside a space that looked empty on camera. I wonder whether he ever stepped in. I hope he didn't. I also understand why he might have. On some mornings, right before I drift back to sleep, I dream I'm at the East Bank again. My hand is out like his, palm up, testing the temperature of a thing you can't see. The doors open and cold air washes over my fingers. There's a weight in front of me. Nothing on the floor but something in the space, like a room filled with people who agreed to be quiet. A voice from nowhere says, "Transport to 409, gentle and patient with forever to wait." I almost say, "Here," because that's what you say in roll call when you want to be counted. Then I wake up with my hand still lifted, palm, cool, as if the air held it for a second longer than it needed to. I worked the night shift at a mall that should have been dead by midnight but never quite was. Even when the storefronts were locked and the overheads dimmed to that low yellow that makes every surface look nicotine-stained, there was always some hum hiding in the walls, the compressors and the escalators and the HVAC doing their endless loop, and then the music that was supposed to shut off but didn't. Strip mall pop from a playlist no one owned, warped around the edges like a cassette left on a dashboard. It was late winter, a Tuesday, and I was 3 months into the job, still learning which doors kicked if you hit them a certain way, and which cameras fogged up when the kitchen vents in the food court started exhaling. The mall had an abandoned wing that management, in all caps emails, called the redevelopment corridor. In plain terms, it was dead space, half-constructed storefronts with plywood fronts, a carpet that felt like walking on a wet sponge, a skylight with bird droppings, dried into constellations, and an elevator bank that hadn't run since some contractor cut the power for a project that never happened. We were told to sweep it a few times a night to keep teenagers and photographers out. The other guard that night was Nadia, who'd been there for years. She was my supervisor, though she never made a thing of it. She kept the camera wall while I walked. There was also Bashir, the janitor who liked to mop at weird hours so he could be home before dawn, and a maintenance guy, Imran, on call if we needed him, though he lived 20 minutes away and took forever to answer. I'd run the route twice already, and everything was fine in that forgettable way where your brain starts to walk for you. I remember sitting in the security office eating peanuts and watching 2 stray cats play on the loading dock camera feed when the elevator speaker did that little cough it does right before someone presses the call button. Except, like I said, those elevators were dead. The power panel for that bank was tagged and locked with a metal hasp that was supposedly not to be touched. I heard the cough again, that static clearing its throat, and then a small voice. A little. Boys, the sound flattened and distant like he was speaking through a fan. "Hello?" I looked at Nadia over the camera wall, waiting for her to grin and say she'd rerouted something as a joke, but she had the same tight look I probably had. She lifted the radio, already keyed to Channel 1. "Base to Unit 2. Are you in?" "The East elevators," she said. I was Unit 3 that night. Unit 2 was nobody. The voice came again, higher this time, and I could hear that forced bravery kids try on when they think they're being good and not crying. "Hello?" I pressed the button. "I'm stuck." The office felt suddenly smaller, like the ceiling had, slouched. Nadia said slow, "Which elevator?" The speaker gave a crackle, then silence. A scrape like someone's shoe pushing across an elevator floor. Then, "The one with the light." I turned to the monitor that cycles through the redevelopment corridor cameras. Grainy black and white, those fisheye views that make everything bow outward, and saw nothing but a hallway of plywood, a plant dying in a pot with the fake soil glued in place, a directory sign with peeled-off decals. The elevator doors were in frame, metal panels dulled with fingerprints from years ago. No light, no movement. We both heard it then, through the ceiling speaker in the office, like it was routed through the whole mall PA. A child crying. Not huge sobs, quiet, the kind that start and stop when a kid tries to listen for a parent's footsteps. Bashir poked his head in the office doorway with his mop hanging off to one side. He heard it too. He clicked his tongue, said, "Kids," and headed toward the noise before we could say anything. Nadia nodded to me to follow. She stayed too, watch cameras, hand on the phone in case we needed to call someone official. I've been told since that what I did next was dumb, that you secure the area first, you confirm power states and check with maintenance. But here's the thing. If you've ever worked a place like that, you know 99 times out of 100 it's something stupid and you walk in with your flashlight and you are the adult who fixes it. And if it turns out to be something not stupid, you don't want to be the person who stood around waiting while a kid cried in a box. The redevelopment corridor 8 sound. You think malls echo, and they do, but this wing chewed it down to a cotton muffling like a theater right before the movie starts. Everyone whispering. The music was leaking in from the live part of the mall, not the song itself. Just a thin pulse and the occasional bright piano note bent sideways. My boots made a papery noise on the carpet. Bashir was ahead of me with his mop carried like a lance. He called out, "Beta, which one you are in?" And then did that gentle whistle he did when he wanted someone to know he was friendly. The elevator bank was 3 doors in a row, 2 regular and 1 service with a white paint scuff at shin height from years of carts. All 3 had the little stainless steel squares with the speaker holes above the call buttons, the red LED behind. Each button was dark. The access panel had a padlock and a tag that said "Lockout, Tag Out Imran" with a date from 2 months before. I was maybe 10 feet away when the speaker coughed again, and now the crying was right there, bright as if it projected out of my chest. I pressed my shoulder into the leftmost door and gave it a pry. It didn't move. They lock hard. Bashir tried the middle. "Chalo, chalo," he muttered. Then in English, "Hello, baby. You wait. We open." From the speaker, "It's wet." The voice was bowed with disgust like kids get when their socks are soaked. "My feet are wet." My radio crackled. "Nadia, Imran's not picking up. I left a message. I'm calling mall ops." I said, "I'm going to pop the doors." She said, "Don't." Then softer, like she didn't want anyone else to hear, "Just wait with him. Keep him talking." I was going to listen. I swear, I was. I set my flashlight under my arm and leaned into the seam of the right-hand door and wedged my fingers in. The trick is to get the heel of your hand at the opposite side and use your body weight, not your arms. The seam gave half an inch and then more, and the whole door shuddered and slid. A pulse of air came out, colder than the hallway, smelling like a wet basement. The car was there, flush with the hallway, and it was dark inside except for the emergency nightlight and whatever glow leaked in from my flashlight. There was no one in it. The floor looked clean except for a set of prints. You know how sometimes water makes little shapes that look like boot prints and you tell yourself, "That?" But these were small and exact. 5 toes. Heel. Maybe a size 1 or 2. They were wet, the shine dulling as I watched. And they started in the shallow puddle near the back of the car and walked straight to the hallway and then out between where Bashir and I stood. And then they kept going. The carpet soaked it in quick like it had been waiting. I stepped back on instinct to let whoever it was pass, and Bashir did too, both of us making space. There was no one. The speaker hissed. "Don't leave me," it said, and the cry went up again, farther away somehow, like he had wandered into the rest of the system, into the veins of the building. We stared at the footprints. They went 6 steps into the corridor, and then, this is the part I keep trying to describe and hearing myself, knowing how it sounds. They just stopped. The last print had the toes cut off by nothing, not even a clean line, just mid-air. Like the kid had lifted his foot to take the next step. And in that space between floor and foot, the floor forgot what it was supposed to be. Bashir did his little whistle and then made the sign some people make when they pass a graveyard. He put his mop down slow enough that it didn't thump. "Call," he said to me without looking. I had Nadia on the radio saying Ops was on the line and should she call the police, and I said don't, because I didn't want cops before I had something to hand them. The speaker coughed again, this time from the middle elevator. "It's dark," the voice said, and the radio hissed with some crosstalk from a store security team 2 floors away arguing about inventory numbers, and underneath that I could hear it again. The thin music from the open mall twisting itself into a nursery melody I couldn't name but nearly could, like remembering the shape of a word. I walked the prints. My flashlight found each one. 6 small wet shapes, darker blue than the carpet, and then the absence of a 7th that hurt to look at, like the place the 7th should have been was brighter somehow. The air around us felt charged, the tiny hairs on my arms lifting in a slow wave. Bashir said, "Beta," very gently, as if to keep me from the edge of a hole, but I kept my hand out in front of me and swept it through where the next step would be. Something stung like when you stick your hand out a car window and hit a hard gust. The speaker, now the left elevator, crackled with a whisper of wind, and there was that dry sound of someone in damp clothes shifting their weight. I pressed. "The button," the boy said. The door opened. "Why didn't you come?" I said, "I'm here," and heard how dumb that sounded, because I was not where he needed me to be. Nadia's voice felt like a rope thrown in. "Unit 3, come back to the office. Ops will send Imran and call the non-emergency line. You don't need to." She stopped. We both heard it. Coming through the ceiling speakers in the corridor, not the elevator this time. A tone like when the mall plays a pre-recorded announcement, except the announcement didn't run. The tone went on too long, warbling at the end. Then a different voice, tinny. "All staff to Children's Court. The balloon release will begin in 5 minutes." The recording had that grain of an event long past, the kind of thing you can tell even through static was captured years ago. Bashir squinted up at the ceiling like he could see the sound. He said, "Old." I said, "Yeah." The redevelopment corridor turned another artery and another, and at the far end it hooked left to the service hall that ran behind the shops. I followed the direction the prince would have gone, which is nonsense, but that's what I did. And as I moved, the music slipped in and out of itself, turning from that warbled mall pop into something too slow and then too cheerful, a kind of loop, and I kept catching phantom reflections in the dark shop windows. Faces that were me and also not me, delayed by a half-second like the glass was buffering. The service hall behind the defunct Build-A-Bear smelled like old sugar and damp cardboard. A cluster of helium tanks leaned under a tarp. Someone had taped up a poster with a cartoon bear that had gone gray around the edges and read, "Our friends are here to help tie knots." And I heard the child again right behind my shoulder, an exhale that made my ear itch. "I got a red one," he said. "Mom said hold it tight." I know how the mind works. You read the words and your brain suggests the rest. You step into a cool place and you remember every story about a cool place. I know I might have walked into that hall thinking balloon release and trying to picture it. Still, the next noise wasn't mine. The sound of a string dragging across tile. I aimed the flashlight low and the beam skimmed across nothing for a second and then slid over a length of string that moved as if pulled by someone just out of frame. The light made it glow. That cheap nylon somebody always thinks will be easier to tie than ribbon. I reached for it and the air did that pushback again, harder, enough to stop my hand. The string twitched like a fish testing a line. My radio clicked to life with the flattening of 3 voices at once. Nadia, Ops, and another guy whose name I didn't know, all asking where I was, and to please little by little retrace and return. Bashir said my name in that way old men say your name like an entire sentence. I kept my eyes on the string. The end rose in a polite 2 inches, the way a kid tugs to show you something, and then it drifted sideways, and I followed, step, 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 passing the staff door to the old arcade, which still had the outline of a neon sign discoloring the paint above it, and then a maintenance closet, where I'd once found a bird somehow alive in summer, and then a set of double doors with a fire exit sign someone had taped over with office, paper and written backstage in Sharpie during some long-ago event. I put my shoulder to that door and it gave, and the air on the other side was colder again and sweeter somehow, like chocolate left open. You might think I didn't notice the wet then, but I did. It soaked into my socks just enough to make my toes prickle. The flashlight beam found ripples across the floor, a skim of water just a few millimeters deep, the kind you get when a pipe sweats or a roof's been dripping for hours. I said out loud, "Imran will kill us," and Bashir said, "Imran can try," but his voice had shrunk a little. We walked into what used to be the Children's Court, an open square where parents sat while kids played in a foam castle. The foam was gone. The benches were stacked. The skylight was a grid of blackness with the faint suggestion of tree branches etched into it from dirt and birds. There was water here, more than the service hall, pooled in the dips of the floor, and in it, balloons. Not bright colors. Their rubber had gone cloudy, but they were there, half inflated, nuzzling the ceiling at hip height, the air inside them colder than ours, so they bobbed like drunks. Their strings trailed down and ran along the surface of the water, making faint paths. It isn't that balloons in an empty mall are scary. It's that everything in a mall is made to be seen with people. When you take the people out, the things sit there and remember. The speaker in the ceiling let out that tone again, and then someone clapped 3 times offbeat, and then a microphone squealed and a woman laughed in that way you laugh to cover the squeal, and then nothing. The string at my feet lifted and laid itself across my boot, and then, like a kid hiding and still wanting to be found, it gave a little tug. I whispered without meaning to, "Hey, buddy." And the tug came again. 2 tiny yanks like I'd taught a dog a trick, and then the ceiling speakers all at once screamed. It wasn't words. It was feedback like a blade. Bashir flinched so hard he dropped the mop. Nadia yelled in my radio, "They're moving!" And for 1 second I thought she meant the balloons, which were a little, but she meant the elevators. On the camera, she said later, the out-of-service lights had blinked and the door indicators, the little arrows above the frames, had lit in a cascade like someone was taking a ride with a finger on every button. In the children's court, the water skinned over with goose flesh and then settled. I said to the empty air near my face, "I'm here." Again. And then, because something in me finally came back online, I said, "What's your name?" The answer was so quiet I wasn't sure I'd heard it right. "Evan," I said. "Okay, Evan, can you tell me where you are?" A pause, a tiny, wet breath. Down. My brain auto-filled with that impossible space, the place below the place. I looked at the floor and pictured not concrete and crawl space and utility, but the gap we warn kids about. The place between elevator and hallway that we all assume resolves in metal and bolts but is in my mind forever now a throat. The balloons made their small touching sounds, rubber against rubber. The string on my boot slid away. I walked backward, slow, and Bashir matched me, and we left the court and re-entered the service hall and the redevelopment corridor without turning our backs. The footprints were still there, 6 and then air. I looked into the open car, which waited like a patient mouth. I said stupidly to the speaker, "We'll get you," like I had any idea what that meant. And then things happened quickly, the way they do after a slow burn. Nadia called again to say the police were on their way regardless, that ops had pulled the old event logs, and yes, there had been a balloon release 6 years ago for a charity tie-in in the children's court, and someone had complained about a leak that day and they'd put down mats and a wet floor sign. And later in the afternoon, mall security had handled a lost child report for a boy around 4. The mother had found him near the elevator bank on the live side, but she'd been in such a state they'd walked her to her car. There had been no official incident. If I wanted to know whether anyone had fallen or been hurt, I would need to wait for records in the morning. She said all of it fast and clipped like speed would make it less heavy. Then she said my name in that same soft rope-throwing way as before and, "Please come back now." I told her we were coming. We weren't. Not yet. I stepped into the elevator car. Bashir made a noise in his throat like a warning and then got into the middle car, as if to keep the line between us alive. The emergency light inside my car made everything look greenish. The door open button didn't do anything when I pressed it, no power, but the speaker hissed with a C sound, a fake wind. I said, "Evan, I'm in the elevator. Is this the right one?" The hiss leaned into a shape like words and then fell apart. There was a scuffle noise at ankle height, and something cold touched the top of my shoe like a wet sock had been dropped on it, and then pulled away. My hand went out palm first into that hard, invisible push. It felt like I was holding up a heavy box with my fingertips. The floor seemed to tip, just a hair, and I remembered every story about old cables and failures, and my ribs tried to bend around my heart. Bashir said from the next car, very steady, "We are here. Show us." The doors on both cars, which I'd wedged, shivered. Somewhere above us, a relay thunked. The down arrow above the service elevator blinked. In the speaker, a child inhaled. A thin, brave, shaky inhale. And then the music from the live mall swung into something almost recognizable. 11 notes, a lullaby or jingle. The tune kids hum without knowing why. And every hair on my arms and the back of my neck rose because it wasn't a song I knew, and yet I knew I'd heard it while walking behind my mother in a mall as a kid, bored and small and certain the world knew where I was even when she let go of my hand. The air in the car went cold enough I saw my breath. The pressure against my palm eased like something had stepped through to me. I said, before I could think, "Step back," and then the weight slammed into me, a hard, sudden shove, and I stumbled out of the car into the corridor and hit my shoulder on the frame. Bashir cursed. The mop skittered. The speaker yowled with feedback so loud my teeth ached. The door tried to close on my boot, and then jerked like it hit something and bounced, and then the metal mouth shut. I stood there with my breath moving too fast, listening. In the speaker, for a second, the crying cut off, like when a child hears a sound on the other side of a door, like footsteps, and freezes to listen. I whispered, "Evan?" No answer. The down arrow on the service elevator blinked again, and then the whole light panel died. Sirens would come in a few minutes. Nadia would walk down with 2 officers and talk us through what we'd seen while one of them checked the lockout. Tagan said skeptically that anyone with a key could have turned those things back on. Imran would show up in his jacket and flip open a panel and say everything was still off and shrug. Ops would promise to pull the building's voice system logs. Some number would be wrong or absent. The city dispatcher would ask if there was a child missing in the area tonight, and when told no would say then it's nothing. And you could hear the apology under the annoyance because everyone has a limit to how many ghosts they can make room for in a shift. But before all that, while it was still just me and Bashir in the corridor in the dead light, we stood and listened to the quiet. There was a drip somewhere far off, regular, like a metronome, but nothing else. The 6 wet prints across the carpet had dulled, then darkened as if someone had walked them backward. The half print at the end softened and widened, as water does when pressed. I did not see a small footstep down. You will think that's me trying to convince you I'm not making things up, but I'm telling you exactly what I saw, which was nothing, and then more of the print than there had been, and then a full set of toes where there had been air. I said out loud for the 3rd time, "I'm here." And then, because I'd meant it all along, even if I didn't know what I meant, I added, "I'll stay." The print didn't move again. The crying didn't return. The balloon strings back in the court made their small wet drags along the floor again, as if a draft had finally found them. We walked away without turning our backs, and when Nadia met us at the corner near the dead plant and the peeling directory sign, she looked at our shoes first, because that's what a person who's done this for a while knows to do. The water line ran high across the leather, higher than made sense. I worked another month. I didn't go back to that corridor unless I had to, and when I did, I spoke out loud before I got to the elevator bank the way you clear your throat before church. And I said, "It's me." Like you talk to a dog you don't want to startle. Nothing else happened until the night the new management company toured the site, and one of their suits laughed at the redevelopment plans and said, in front of me, "Level this side and start over." On my last walkthrough of the shift, the mall music glitched mid-chorus and dropped to that same thin version of itself, the lullaby almost tune, and the elevator speaker coughed once, twice, and then said, in a voice I could have mistaken for a recorded announcement if not for how it knew me, "Don't go." I looked at the sealed doors and felt that ridiculous ache behind my eyes you get in movies at the airport, and I said, "They'll tear this down." The speaker gave a small static click like a tongue against teeth. "Did you see me?" It asked, and because I owed something, because you owe something when you stand in the dark and say you're there, I told the truth. I saw where you were. I clocked out. I drove home with the radio off. At a red light, the car in the lane beside me had its windows down and music on, and the melody curled across like fog, and I swear I recognized it. I turned my radio on. Nothing but a talk show. I told myself all kinds of normal answers. When I got to my building, I did the dumb thing where you run the last steps because the stairwell feels too deep, and I was laughing at myself when I heard it from the intercom by my apartment door. The little cough, the speaker adjusting itself, and then softly like a kid trying not to wake anyone. "Hello?" There are explanations for this, technical ones about crosstalk and frequency and cheap wiring. There are ones about suggestion. There are ones about a child who wandered beyond where a mall is built to take care of him and fell into a space the plans didn't account for. and people who put those plans in a drawer and put on their coats and went home because that's what people do. I am not the person to give you any of those in a way that will make you feel safe. All I can tell you is I stood in my hallway with my keys cutting into my palm and stared at the little metal grill and said, "One last time, I'm here." And the voice on the other side, that small, brave voice that had learned the pattern for a promise and now wanted to test it, said, "I pressed the button for your floor." And then the line went dead, and outside, 3 floors down, someone's kid started crying in the parking lot, honest and loud, alive in the cold, and I stood and did not move until that sound turned back into just a night, and the night turned, as it always does, into morning, and the mall, I heard later, took on water in the storm, and they closed the wing for good. And maybe finally there's a door somewhere in there that opens. And if you're the one who finds it, you'll think for a second you're alone until the music bends toward a tune you almost know. And then a voice you can't place will say hello like it believes you came to get it, and you'll have to decide if you did. I used to think I was pretty good at telling when a job site was about to go sideways, just from the way the air changes, like how a storm makes a parking lot feel heavy right before the first drop. So I should have called the night off the lay. Second, the elevator doors started breathing on their own, but I didn't, and a guy I knew named Vargas went missing, and I can still hear him in vents when a room goes quiet enough to feel wrong. This happened last fall in a 60-story glass thing downtown when it was still a skeleton. Steel columns singing when the wind hit right. Plywood walkways spitting splinters under boots. That phase when you're using temporary power and generator. Lights, and every edge has OSB or caution tape because nothing's real yet. Not hallways, not lobbies, not the fancy finishes from the renderings. Just dust and echo. I was assistant night super, which meant I lived on that site after sundown with a clipboard, 2 radios, and the key ring that made you feel like a jailer. And I knew everyone on nights at least by voice. Guys who tie rebar and joke like uncles. Drywall crews who sing loud to keep from falling asleep. Elevator installers who move like they're on a ship because they're always on top of a car. The day before Vargas went missing, we'd had a partial power cut when one of the electricians did something out of sequence on level 32, and the backup didn't kick clean, so half the tower blinked, and the south hoist died with a load of sheetrock, 3 floors up, and made the whole building hold its breath. That was the first time I heard it, that weird hush, where sound slides off the concrete like it's oiled. By the next night, power was supposed to be stable again, but I had that pressure headache you get when something in the HVAC is wrong. Except there was no HVAC yet, just shafts. We had 2 lifts in play, the external hoist, a rattly orange thing, bolted to the face of the building, open grating, grease on your palms forever, and an interior car in shaft B that the elevator crew had rough commissioned for tool runs between 1 and 25. Not for passengers, not officially, but you know how? Rules are on nights when the general contractor's office is dark. Vargas wasn't my friend exactly, but he was one of those steady hands everybody liked. A concrete guy, but he could operate a lift if he had to. Goofy laugh, big beard he'd tuck into his hoodie like a scarf when it got windy, and he had this superstition where he'd tap the door frame twice before riding any lift, even the exterior. Said it knocked on the void, which was funny until it wasn't. Around 11:40 p.m., Floor 17 asked me for a pallet jack, and the easiest way up there from the loading dock without carrying it through 5 switchbacks was to use the interior car for 2 hops, and I told them no. And then I saw the door to B open and heard Vargas on the radio say, "Just a jump to 10, then 17, copy." And I was going to bark at him when I noticed my other radio, the one hooked into the elevator tech's private channel, buzzed and spit a soft breath like somebody exhaling directly into my ear. I remember looking down the hoistway and seeing a rectangle of light slide up, then stop like a slow blink. The hallway lights on 3 flickered and took half the corridor with them, and then there was that hush again, like somebody put a pillow over the city. "Hold for reset," I said, and reached for the breaker panel near the shaft, and the corridor went dim but not dark. All the generator floods kicked to moon mode, and somebody far away yelled a joke that went flat. Nobody laughs. Right when they're waiting for unknowns. I turned the key to off then on and listened for the relay click that says the car is alive. And the relay clicked, but not like normal, more like ice cracking on a pond. And then a scream dropped through the shaft. Not from above, not from below, just through. The way cold air slides downstairs, and it hit my chest so hard I stepped back and my keys banged the glass on the fire extinguisher cabinet, and I swear the sound took shape in the hallway, like it had edges. "He's trapped!" Someone yelled from 7, which is a stupid thing to yell when a guy's in a box designed to trap you safely. But it made sense because the screaming kept moving without going anywhere, bouncing off duct openings like a stubborn fly. We ran the stairs. Me and Mason and Priya from the electrician crew and a couple of drywall guys who looked shocked to be sprinting. And on 8 we met Reed, one of the elevator installers, white as the dust on his shirt and already jamming a drop key into the hall station. It's a simple motion. Quarter turn, the lock releases, you pry the hoistway doors, and then, if the car's there, you open the car doors. But Reed turned the key, and nothing popped, like the lock didn't believe what was happening. Inside, the shaft, the scream warped into a voice saying, "Open, open, open." Except it wasn't exactly a voice, more like the idea of one, the word under the scream. We forced the panels with a crowbar, metal paged like a book, and there was the car. No, not the car, the empty rectangle where it should have been. Darkness with that weird knot echo. And then the lights in the cab slid up past us one floor and fell back down without passing our opening. Like the car blinked out and back. We ran to 9 and did the doors again. And this time when we forced them, the car was there, but no Vargas, no pallet jack, just the car light swinging like a lamp in a basement. And we could smell brake dust and that sweet U-joint grease that gets under your nails for a week, and we heard him both above and below, "Hey, hey, hey, hey." And it stretched thin into a tone like a tuning fork that hurts your teeth. There are protocols for this, and I've done the drill. You power down, you tag out, you do not send a guy on top of a car unless you anchor him and you have eyes and comms. But the easy rules crack when someone's screaming that fast, and we're all monkeys under the helmets anyway. Reed slapped the kill, clipped in, climbed up onto the car roof, and I held his harness with Mason like we were trying to hold down a kite. And Reed pressed his ear to the metal and shook his head, and then put his cheek to the panel where the inspection controls live and said very quietly, "It's in the air." And I thought he meant the echo, but his face said something else, like scent. We eased the car doors and checked the sump in the pit for any sign of fall, because sometimes a guy tries to climb out and drops, but the pit was dry and clean like the whole thing had been wiped. Reed hit the inspection up toggle to bring the car in line with 9 so we could step in and check the corners and the safety ledge, and the car moved a hair and stopped like something pinched the rails, and my radio popped without beeping. Dead. Channel coming alive. And I heard my own voice say, "Hold for reset." The exact words from 10 minutes earlier, but with a delay like we were under a mountain, and Priya went, "What the? Hear that?" And I nodded and tried to pretend it was crosstalk. We swept floors 8 through 12, every landing, every ladder, checked behind stacks of GWB where a guy could hide to prank us, because, listen, job sites are half-hazing rituals. There's always a dude who thinks it's funny to disappear when the boss is sweating. But nobody hides for 20 minutes while other grown adults scream your name. Not a guy like Vargas with a kid at home and a second shift at his brother's garage. His radio lay on 10 under the hall station, red LED steady, no scuffs, and the coil cord still looped tight like he'd set it down careful on purpose. At 12:16 a.m., the building went quiet in a way that made my eardrums feel hollow, and the scream faded to this thin whistle like wind on a bottle lip, and we just stood there, a half-dozen people with dust prints on their faces, and listened to the last shadow of Vargas's voice fall down the shaft and go out like it starved. We called 911, of course, and the police came, and the site safety guy on days came, and the GC came in his fancy truck and chewed gum in a way that said he'd rather be asleep. And the elevator company sent a boss who looked at the machine room like an oncologist entering a bad patient's room, and they did all the right checks. And then the official story started to drift. Maybe Vargas took the exterior hoist down and wandered off. Maybe there was a medical event and he got disoriented and left the site. Maybe he was never in the car. Maybe a prank, maybe a fight. You know how it goes when nobody wants the lawyers to point and eat you alive. But none of those maybes explain what kept happening. For 3 nights after, around the same slice of time, somebody would key into a level and get a hit of cold air like the fridge door had been open too long, and then their radio would catch breath and not words, and then we'd hear a bang from Inside the hoistway like a boot heel on metal, and then sometimes a voice. Not Vargas's at first, more like a crowd muffled by drywall, and then clear as the fluorescent hum. Open. The fourth night, about 1:05 a.m., the emergency phone in the car, the one you use if the doors won't open, called the site office, which wasn't connected to anything yet. But the phone on the metal desk in the office rang anyway, and Mason answered, and he said later it sounded like it was 2 floors away because of all the reverb. And a man said, "I'm between 9 and 10, can you hear me?" And Mason said, "Yes, hold on, we're coming." And then the office phone speaker filled with that bottle lip whistle, and the call dropped. We sprinted again, checked again, nothing again. On day shift, they pretended it was a prank and threatened to fire whoever was doing it, which is hilarious because we barely had working lines to call out on, let alone some wizard to spoof an elevator handset. The cops did one more sweep. They interviewed all of us in a break room that still smelled like blueberry muffins from the last daytime safety meeting, and I gave the same story twice and watched the officer underline the hour and the floor and tap his pen on his notepad like he was trying to drum an explanation into the walls. There's a thing people don't talk about in new buildings because it sounds dumb. Sometimes the shapes we draw with steel and concrete make a sound you can't stand to stand in. Not exactly a frequency, not exactly wind, more like a pressure, event your body notices before your brain, and this tower had it bad, especially in unfinished rooms where shafts open to shafts. Acoustics guys will tell you about standing waves and nodes and how certain dimensions trap certain tones. So maybe that's the entire story, and I'm an idiot who wants a ghost, but if it's just noise, explain the footprints. On the 6th night, when I was trying to write up a report that would not make my boss think I was trying to tank my own promotion, I went to 11 with a flashlight and walked the hallway edges, because cost code 11,007, cleaning, ends up, meaning the assistant super is a janitor with opinions. And I saw boot tread in the dust that switched directions halfway, not with a turn, but with a flip, like the left and right swapped places in a step. I crouched to take a picture because nobody believes your words after midnight, and my radio hissed and played me the sound of my own camera shutter, even though the radio's microphone was on my chest and the camera wasn't wired to anything. And I said, "Read, you on?" And somebody said, "Hold for reset," using my voice from 2 nights before, so perfect I could hear the coffee dry in the back of my throat. That night, Reed did something dumb that felt like the only smart thing left. He went on top of the car again, this time with 2 lifelines and 3 of us on belay, and he brought chalk, the kind masons use for snapping lines, and he palmed some and dusted the inspection panel and the emergency hatch like he was dusting for prints, and then the hatch popped a hair and the chalk blew inward like the shaft was breathing in, and Reed whispered, "No, no, no." And we heaved him back by the harness, and he slid onto the landing on his knees and stayed that way for a stupid long time. Day shift shut us out of the shaft after that, which I can't say I hated, but it didn't stop the calls, not every night, but enough to make the building feel like it was being taught a word against its will. 2 weeks after Vargas, management pushed hard to get the permanent power tied in so we could stop blaming the generator for every creep. And that meant one more scheduled blackout at 1 a.m., me and Priya and Reed on babysit at the panel while the utility guys did their magic. The exterior hoist was locked at the ground. The interior car was parked at 2. We did all the tag-outs, everything bright and proper. When the tower went dark, the dark wasn't empty. It had weight, like standing in the entrance to a cave, and you could hear the city out there, but it sounded like it lived down a long pipe. Our headlamps threw sharp cones in the corridor, and dust made little galaxies. Then, honest to God, the interior car bell dinged on 2, no power to it, and the car light glowed like a lantern with a dying battery. Reed said, "Nope," like he was arguing with a dog, and I said, "We stay by the panel, because rules give you something to hold." The bell dinged again, doors breathed, that same rubber seal sigh, and then the emergency handset started, to ring not once but steady, the ancient sound of a real bell in a metal box being hit by a little hammer. Priya looked at me like, "Your move, boss," and I hated being a different kind of stupid again, but I jogged to 2, past the open shaft on 1 where my light made a weak cone in the dark, and found the car doors cracked just enough I could grab an edge. "You got me?" I called, and Reed said, "I got you," and I believed him, because I needed to. I set my boots, pulled with my legs, and the doors gave an inch, another, then slid open like they had never been stiff, and the car was there, empty, light humming, handset off the hook and penduluming on its cord like a cracked metronome. I picked it up and said, "Site office," because that's the phrase that lived in my mouth after so many nights, and I heard white noise, then the faintest scrape, then me, my own voice like it traveled a long pipe. "I'm between 9 and 10, can you hear me?" Which we all heard the other night from the office phone. I said, "Where are you, Vargas?" And the white noise hissed like a steam radiator, and then Rex, our day super who never came at night, said in my ear from some Tuesday morning 3 months earlier, "We don't use B after hours, copy?" And then somebody else, a woman from teaching me to properly fill out the daily log months ago, said, "Sign here." And then a tone like a tuning fork bent in half. And then not me, not anyone I knew. Just one guy, close, raw, open. I dropped the handset without wanting to, and it did that little bounce and hit the metal and rang itself. And that stupid human part of me that wants to see the thing it's afraid of leaned into the car like I'd catch a glimpse of Vargas under the bench seat like a kid hiding, which would have been a relief, honestly. Any meat solution is better than whatever a building can think up. And a gust came up from the pit like the shaft had exhaled, so cold I felt it in my molars, and the car dipped a hair on its cables, though. There was no power, and I saw chalk prints on the hatch that didn't match anything we'd made. 2 hands splayed wide, fingers too long by a joint, chalk smudged where nails would worry the metal. I don't know if I moved first or if Reed hauled me, but I was in the corridor, on my ass, and the doors slid shut in that polite way automatic doors do when they're tired of you. And then the whole building made a noise like a whale moaning, through rebar, and the car slid upward in the dark without electricity. The generator outside coughed and tried to live again, and the corridor lights shot a thin blue across the floor and died, and we ran the stairs because there's no other way to outrun something invisible but not slow. At 3 we heard the car above, at 4 it was below. At 7 the sound split like the scream in that first night, and I couldn't tell if it was on the rise or the drop. And on 9 we pried, because that was where the voice always wanted us. And when the panels kissed apart, there was the car, level and present and full of light like a chapel and nobody in it. Handset on the hook, chalk clean except for our prints. But the roof panel, where Reed dusted days ago, had fresh swipe marks from the inside like someone had tried to push it open, and their hands went straight through the chalk and never left skin oil. And on the far wall, near the inspection toggle, someone had written with a finger in the dust, "Punch list," and below that, "Open." We didn't finish the tie-in that night. The utility crew left with faces that said union rules don't cover haunted wiring. After that, the building hurried to cover its own bones. Drywall, paint, carpet, ceilings, finishes, all the human comfort stuff that muffles edges and keeps the mind from seeing how empty a thing is, and for a while it worked. Day shift got loud and bright and normal, and at night the calls were less, or maybe I was just better at pretending they were trucks on the street, not a voice asking the same single verb. We never found Vargas. They pulled his badge access records, his pay stubs, asked his brother, combed cameras on neighboring buildings, nothing. His name faded to a line on a safety poster that nobody reads. Then the tower opened, and tenants moved in, and I got reassigned to another job with fewer glass edges and more brick, and I told myself I'd let it go, that what I'd heard was stress and resonance, and that any place with that much vertical will make your instincts mistake. Air for intention. 2 months into the new assignment, I was at a red light by the base of the glass tower on my way home at 3 a.m., because that's the stupid clock my body keeps, and I watched the lobby guard stand up and look around like he'd dropped something important, and my phone lit with an unknown number, and I did the don't answer dance for half a ring, and then answered because I am human, and humans can't stand the idea of missing the thing that sells certainty. And it was the tone first, that bottle lip, whistle, then the closest version of Vargas I ever got in the month since. "Hey," and a pause like he'd put his hand over the receiver, and another, "Hey," louder, like he'd found the mouth, and then my own voice, closer than my skull, a breath I didn't make, saying, "Hold for reset," right into my ear with all the day's dust and last night's coffee in it, and then a click, not like a hang-up, more like a relay deciding, and the call dropped. The light turned green. The lobby security guy leaned into the console like an elevator bell had rung. A group of drunk kids laughed by the revolving door and spun a little too long, and then stumbled into the marble like they'd forgotten the ground has rules. The tower's skin did that thing where it reflects a different version of the city, back at itself. I put my phone on the seat and drove away like you do when a dog growls at nothing, just slow, like speed might break the thin peace. If this had a neat ending, I'd tell you we shut down the car and pulled new cable and it stopped. Or we found Vargas in some other city with a fake name. Or I woke up and it was a stress dream caused by energy drinks and bad acoustics. But the truest thing is smaller. Unfinished work has a way of calling your name with your own voice when you're alone in the places that catch sound. And buildings remember what we do to them, especially when we cut their cores open and teach them to breathe, and sometimes when we don't close something properly. Not a panel, not a job, not a promise. It keeps breathing on its own, pulling dust in and pushing dust out, whispering the one thing it wants until someone finally does. Last week in my new job's stairwell, I passed a locked door for a future shaft and heard the faintest bell. Then the shape of a man's yell stretched thin by concrete. Then, very politely, like an office phone somewhere spooling up from dead, a ring, just one, which is nothing. It's air, it's history, it's a big hollow playing tricks. Except I've learned to listen for the places where noise gets stuck. And when I stopped and held my breath and let my headlamp off and let the building speak, I realized the silence around the ring wasn't empty. It was heavy, like waiting, like a mouth pressed to a crack. I tapped the frame twice. An old superstition that isn't mine that I do anyway now, and I kept walking. And on the concrete, in chalk from some carpenter's snapped line, my boot left prints that were prints normal. Left where left should be and right where right should be, and I looked back, just to be sure. And in the quiet I swear I heard it, as gentle and stubborn as ever. Open. I used to clean a government building where the clocks were always a few minutes wrong. It was one of those ugly rectangles of concrete that sit in the middle of a city like a dull tooth. District Services Complex, birth certificates on the near. Third floor, tax compliance on the fourth, records in the basement, security on the first. During the day it was a line of people and a smell like old paper. At night it was me, a security guard named Tariq, and a humming that seemed to come from inside the walls even when everything was shut off. My shift was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., Monday to Friday. I liked the quiet and the way the fluorescent lights left islands of brightness in the hallways. The only place I didn't like was the elevator lobby between floors 2 and 3. The building had 2 elevators, east and west, and a stairwell that never quite lost the smell of wet concrete. The west elevator had a habit of stopping a little low, like it couldn't be bothered to reach the floor. People would stumble getting out. We'd reported it. Engineering filed it under to be addressed. That phrase covered a lot in that building. The first night I noticed the blood was a Wednesday in January. I was mopping the second floor lobby, listening to Tariq's little radio crackle with a game from his phone. The audio drifted in and out, the crowd, the commentator, then static. Around 1 a.m., I saw a thick, dark drop gather along the seam of the west elevator doors. It was the slow kind of drip, like syrup, except it clung a little to the metal before letting go. It landed on my freshly mopped tile and spread the way blood spreads in movies when they want you to notice it. Too neat, too defined. I stared for a long time. A second drop gathered and fell. I hit the call button, then the close button, then the emergency alarm. The car wasn't moving. Tariq arrived, jogging, hand on his belt like a cop in a TV show. He looked at the tile, then at the seam. We both took a step back when a third drop formed, shook like a beetle, and released. "Someone's hurt," I said. "That car isn't moving." He said, "Look." He pointed at the indicator above the doors. It was on 3 steady green. No up or down arrows. Maybe someone's inside. Maybe they pressed stop. Tariq shook his head. If they had the stop on, the alarm would already be going. We put a temporarily out of service sign in front of the doors because that felt like the right thing to do. And I took the stairs up to 3. The west elevator doors on 3 looked normal. No drips, no smell. I pressed my ear to the seam and heard nothing. I hit the call button and the lights blinked like the system was thinking. The indicator stayed on 3. When I went back down, the wet spots were gone. The floor shone under the fluorescent lights as if I had just mopped it. I looked at Tariq like maybe he was playing a prank, but he just shrugged. "Maybe it wasn't blood," he said. "You know, some rust water. Rust water doesn't bead like that. It doesn't smell like copper when you lean too close." But I told him he was probably right, because the building taught you to go along, with practical answers. The next morning I wrote it in the logbook. West car, possible leak from seam. It felt stupid even as I wrote it. The maintenance manager, Miss Farah, read the overnight notes first thing every day and underlined entries with a red pen. That afternoon she drew a red line under mine and added, "Monitored, no leak." I told myself not to care. I came back. The next night to the same humming halls and the same 2 bright lights. At 12:37 a.m., I saw a smear on the inside of the west car door, like someone had leaned a bloody palm against the metal and slid toward the seam. I reached for my phone to take a picture, then thought about how it would look if I was wrong. I wiped it with a rag. The smudge came away like normal dirt and the rag didn't stain. At 1:53, Tariq called me on the radio. "Come to security," he said. He never called me by name on the radio. He didn't say please. The security room was down a hall behind a locked door. Inside, the air smelled like microwave popcorn and toner. He had the camera feeds up on the big monitor, 16 squares, some black, some gray. He pointed to a window labeled West Lift 2F. The timestamp in the corner read 01:10:53:12. The camera showed the west elevator lobby, where I'd been mopping the night before. Empty. We both watched the screen without talking. At 01:54:31, a small flicker ran down the seam of the doors like a shadow moving behind a curtain. "Play it back," I said. "It's live," he said. "Watch the time." He pointed at the minutes, the seconds rolling forward. I leaned closer. The camera auto-adjusted its brightness and made the hall look like it was underwater. At 01:56:14, a drop fell. It was the same slow thing I'd seen the night before. Then another. Then a shape in the seam bulged, as if the space between the car and the lobby was filling with something. I left the room to go look with my own eyes. The hall was empty. No drips, no smell. Just the low tone of the lights and the click of the exit sign. When I went back to security, the feed showed a dark puddle and Tariq was holding his breath, like he'd run to fetch me but never moved. We called Ms. Farah. She answered on the first ring, voice steady. Too steady for 2 a.m. She told us to power cycle the west car and keep the lobby closed. I asked if we should call the police or an ambulance. She said, "Not yet." She said it like she was reading from a laminated card. I'd never heard that tone from her before. I shut the power to the west car with the key in the wall panel. The indicator winked off. The humming stayed. The kind of hum you hear when you're already thinking about it. We watched the feed until 3. The puddle seemed to fade between frames like the system was cleaning itself. By 3:15, it was just cloudy. At 6 a.m., when the day crew came in, the elevator opened for them like nothing was wrong. I watched a man in a gray suit step in, check his phone, and ride up to 4. That morning, Farah met me at the time clock. She didn't ask how I was. She asked me to sign a form, acknowledging that I had noticed a cosmetic fluid discharge associated with the elevator vestibule, and that engineering had addressed it appropriately. The form had a number in the corner, and the paragraph started with, "Pursuant to Section 12.3 of the Incident Dispensation Protocol." I laughed, before I could stop myself. She didn't. She tapped the line where my signature should go. I signed. It felt like signing an apology for being the kind of person who notices things. By Friday, everyone on night shift knew about the blood that wasn't blood. The cleaning crew asked me if it was a prank. Tariq said he'd seen weirder. Once the cameras on floor 4 had recorded the hallway in reverse for an hour. People walking backward out of doors, doors closing before they opened. The IT contractor said sometimes the system wrote over frames and got confused. "Digital ghosts, man," he said, trying to be funny. Saturday was my day off. I slept badly, dreamed of doors with no handles. Sunday, I took overtime because the building had a filing backlog from a winter storm. That was the night the footage changed. It was just after 2 when Tariq shouted my name from security. He didn't use the radio. It was the kind of shout that cuts off and leaves the rest in the air. I jogged, mop bucket squeaking behind me. He was standing in front of the monitors with his hands flat on the desk, leaning like a man watching a train not stop. The West Lift 2F camera was full screen now. At 02:01:08, the doors quivered. At 02:01:16, an entire person slid into the gap like someone lowering a body behind a curtain. You could see the shoulder first, then the head turning away, then the hand, fingers spread. "Pause it," I said. He couldn't. It was live again. The minute ticked up to 02:02. The figure twitched, the way people who are being squeezed twitch, small movements with nowhere to go. I felt my own ribs get tight even though I was standing free. "Where is it coming from?" Tariq asked. Not to me exactly. "Is there a camera in the shaft?" There wasn't. We didn't have the budget. The feed was from the lobby, the same as always. The doors stayed closed. The indicator above them didn't move. There was just a person in a place where a person couldn't be, facing a camera that wasn't inside. After a minute, the figure slid down and stopped at kneecap height. The feed glitched and the entire shot shifted left like a slip of film in a projector. When it snapped back, the puddle was bigger. We called Miss Farah again. This time she didn't answer. We called the switchboard. The night operator, a man named Hamid, who always sounded bored, said he would page her. We waited 5 minutes and called again. Finally, Farah arrived in her coat and badge on a lanyard as if the badge could stop anything. She didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who had decided she would not be surprised by a double lightning strike. "We'll call the police," she said, after watching the monitor in silence for 30 seconds. "But know this. They will ask if there is a body. There isn't. They will ask if there is a person stuck. There isn't." She looked at my face, then at Tariq's. "What there is," she said, "is a system failure." "The camera isn't failing," I said, too fast. It is showing a loop," she said, "from a previous incident." "What previous incident?" Tariq asked. Farah looked at the floor and said nothing. Then she called the police. 2 officers came at 02:40, a sergeant and a younger guy who looked like his uniform didn't fit. Yet. They stood with their hands on their belts and watched the feed go from drip to pooling in 7 minutes. Watched the shape in the seam judder as if the elevator car was trying to choose a floor and failing. The younger one swallowed a few times. The sergeant asked to see the elevator. We brought them to the 2nd floor. The tile was clean. The air had that dry electrical taste I'd started to notice. The indicator above the doors, dead. The out of service sign standing stupid like a scarecrow. We took them to 3. We took them to 1. We shut down the west car. The hum didn't change. The sergeant asked for the CCTV logs. Tariq pulled the saved clips from a thumb drive. The system had been flagging the west lobby feed every night that week at 02:14 a.m. A small red dot next to the file names like the machine had learned to be nervous. We queued up a clip from Tuesday. It showed 3 drops, then nothing. Thursday showed a smear. Friday showed a trickle that dried in a jump cut. "Where is the person?" the younger officer asked. Tariq scrolled. "It should be on Saturday," he said, but the Saturday folder was empty. "It's live," I said again, feeling stupid and scared. "It happens around 2. You'll see." We waited. At 02:14, the shape came. This time you could see the head more clearly, turned away, cheek flattened against something we couldn't see. The uniform was the same as before. The shoulder patch was ours. You could almost make out letters. The camera nudged its brightness again, and for a second, the image sharpened. A name tag, white plastic with black letters, tilted at an angle that made the name unreadable except for the first letter, M. It could have been Muhammad or Malik or me. "My name is Nabil." The sergeant rubbed his face. "Okay," he said. He spoke into his shoulder mic. He asked for dispatch to send an Elevator tech and a detective. He asked them to bring bolt cutters and a camera. He spoke in a calm training video voice, and I wanted to shake him. Detective Khan arrived at 3:10 in a wool coat and the kind of shoes that squeak in tile hallways. He was older, with a tired voice that made everything sound routine. He watched. The replay we had saved. If you could call it a replay, it was more like the system had saved an idea of what was going on. He asked Farah about previous incidents again, and this time she told the truth in a flat way. 3 years ago, she said. A file clerk tried to stop the doors with his handcart. The cart tipped. He fell halfway in. The car moved and pinned him at the waist. He lived. The footage from that night got corrupted. The system flagged it, then wrote over it. But once a month for a while, the cameras would trigger in the lobby at 2 a.m. and show the scene moving, as if the machine remembered. It went away. I didn't mention it in the logs because it wasn't actionable. She looked at me like she wanted me to disagree so she'd have somewhere to put her guilt. Khan nodded slowly. And now it's back, he said. It isn't the same, I said. The person in the footage is wearing our uniform. Khan looked at me like I'd walked into a question. Your uniform. It could be anyone, Farah said quickly. Lots of vendors wear blue. Tariq didn't speak. He didn't look at me. His face had that set expression people get when they want a story to be a silly thing they can talk about later, and not a thing that is happening now. The elevator? Tech came with a toolbox and a complaint about being called out of bed. He used a key to open the west doors on floor 3. He shone a light into the shaft and showed us nothing but cables and counterweight. The car was level on 4. He showed us the slight sheen of oil that always lived on everything in the shaft. There's no person, he said. He said it like a promise. We brought him to the second floor. He did the same ritual. No person, no stain, no smell. We watched the feed in the security room again and saw, in the corner of the frame, a little reflection of the tech's flashlight, as if the camera had remembered that too. Khan asked for the building's missing person reports. Farah said there were none. He asked whether anyone had failed to clock out. I told him I was still on the clock. I laughed too loudly at that. He asked for everyone's badges so he could photograph them. He photographed mine. His hands were steady. At 04:02, he asked me to show him everywhere I had been between midnight and 2. I walked him through my route and felt suddenly as if I was presenting an alibi for a crime without a victim. By 5 a.m., the feed had gone back to empty tile. The officers left with a copy of what we had. Khan said he'd be back on Monday, with a warrant for the server, though he said it in a tone that suggested he didn't think the server had anything to give. Farah told me to finish the second-floor bathrooms and stay off the west lobby. Her voice had gone back to its daytime setting. Tariq's radio played morning shows. We both avoided looking at the elevator. I told myself not to come back Sunday night. I told myself I'd find another job. I told myself a lot of brave things while I was washing my coffee mug at home and pouring the water from the kettle in slow, steady lines. But Monday night I clocked in at 10. The building has a way of making you think your life is a form to be filled. You put your name at the top, you check the boxes, you sign at the bottom, and whatever is left over, the building takes. At 1:30, the east car stopped responding. I pressed the call button and it blinked in a lazy way. The indicator stuck on 1. I radioed Tariq. He said, "Engineering is remote rebooting." I said, "Engineering leaves at 5 p.m. He didn't answer. The hall was quiet enough that I could hear the relays click behind the metal. I felt a drop of something cold on my wrist and flinched, but it was only condensation from the air vent. At 01:49, the west car indicator flicked from 4 to 3 to 2 with no arrows, and settled back on 3 as if it had changed its mind. I went to security, without calling. Tariq was not in his chair. The monitors showed a screensaver of the city seal. The little clock in the corner said 01:51. I touched the mouse. The feeds bloomed back to life. Elevators and empty halls. A woman from records walking to the vending, machine on 1. A cleaning cart abandoned near the stairwell. The West Lift 2F window was black for 2 seconds, then came back showing the lobby. I watched the second-hand climb. At 01:58:30, Tariq came back with a sandwich he wasn't supposed to eat at the desk. He handed me half. We both stared at the monitor while we chewed. When the first drop formed, he put his food down. When the figure slid into the seam again, he said, "It's you." He said it like he'd meant not to say it, and it slipped out. His eyes flicked to my shoulder. I looked at the screen and wanted to argue, but the angle of the shoulder looked like mine. The little chain on the badge looked like mine. The shape of the hand where it pressed, scar on the thumb from a box cutter last year. The camera searched for focus and found, for a single frame, my name. There wasn't time to pretend. I stood up too fast and the chair rolled back and hit the filing cabinet. The sound made us both jump. I don't remember leaving security, but I found myself in the second-floor lobby with the out-of-service sign, sitting stupidly to the side like it had marched there by itself. The west doors were closed. The indicator glowed a patient 3. I wanted to open the doors and prove nothing was there. I wanted to wrench them and make the world fit back into its normal shape. Instead, I took the stairs to 3. My breathing sounded like someone else's in the concrete stairwell. The west doors on 3 were also closed. The plate by the keyhole was warm under my finger. The hum was stronger here, like a big cat purring behind a door. I put my ear to the seam and heard a faint texture, not a voice, not a machine, like paper rubbing paper in an endless stack. My radio crackled. Tariq's voice came through thin. "Don't," he said. "Stay away from it." I don't know if I was moving because I chose to or because the building prefers a script. I pressed the call button on 3. The light winked. The indicator stayed at 3. I pressed it again. I heard through the seam a soft slide, like something adjusting itself to meet me. In my head, I pictured the car moving level with me. Doors opening, smooth, nothing wrong. The image was as strong as the hum. I pulled the key from my pocket. It was the service key, the one that could open the outer doors when the car was misleveled, for maintenance and emergencies. The key slid into the plate like it had been waiting. I turned. There was a click and then nothing. The doors didn't move. The hum stayed. I realized my mouth was dry and licked my lips and tasted metal, though there was none on my tongue. I was aware of how alone that hallway was, with the records office door locked and the lights thin and the exit sign green like the idea of safety. I turned the key again. This time the left door shifted a fraction of an inch, then stopped. From the other side something pressed back, one small steady pressure like a fingertip. I took my hand away. I told myself to walk away. I told myself to go downstairs and clock out and never come back. I left the key in and stepped back like distance could take the decision out of my body. My radio hissed and then died. The indicator above the doors toggled between 2 and 3, as if the car was split and belonged to both. Through the seam I felt a draft, a breath that smelled like old dust and that faint copper scent. The hallway lights flickered once. When they steadied, a thin line of red ran vertical down the seam from eye level to the floor. I didn't scream. The sound that came out of me was a low syllable that meant nothing. The line fattened into a wobbling bead. It didn't fall. It hung there like it was thinking. Behind the doors, something shifted again. Not closer or farther, just aware. There is a thing you learn on night shift. You can be watched without being seen. The building has corners it prefers. It has angles that let eyes exist without faces. Standing there, I had the sense that the elevator wasn't a machine. Not exactly. It was a place in the building where the building could touch you. I pulled the key out and ran. I don't remember the stairs. I remember the slam of the security door as I entered, how Tariq's face went gray when he saw mine. We watched the monitor. The timestamp crawled to 2:14 Xiaohuo. In the frame, the seam bulged again. It wasn't like watching a recording anymore. It was like the room I'd been in a minute ago, and the room in the picture were the same space laid over each other, wrong by a few inches. For a breath or two, I was sure that if I reached into the screen, my hand would come out onto that tile, slick and cold. The figure in the seam raised its head like a man who has been underwater and wants one more look at the air. The badge chain glinted. The name tag turned toward us, and I saw the N and the E and the second E. Tariq whispered, "You're here, though," as if we needed to make the universe pick one. I felt a pressure on my chest, not from the outside, but like something hooked from inside and tugged gently. The detective arrived before 3 with 2 uniforms and a tripod. He looked like he'd aged in 2 nights. He set the tripod in the lobby and aimed a camera at the elevator, because sometimes people set up cameras at the places where the flood reaches and then goes back, as if recording proves the tide. He asked me to stand away from the doors. He asked Tariq to keep the feeds running. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets and watched the scene like a man waiting for a verdict. At 0311, the building groaned. Old buildings make noises. Everyone says that. This sounded like a sheet of metal being pulled from a mouth. The east car pinged and decided to return to service on its own. The west indicator blinked 232, then held on 2. The seam shuddered. The camera feed lost a few lines of resolution like heat over asphalt. Then, abruptly, the lobby was clean tile again. The camera recorded a blank floor. My body remembered a lack it shouldn't remember, as if the pressure on my chest had been a hand that had now let go. "Okay," Khan said softly. He sounded disappointed, like a fisherman whose line had gone slack. He asked us to save all the feeds and make copies. He asked me to sign a statement that I'd not been in the elevator at any time between 02 Broad and 0315. The form had numbers and a pre-printed line for my name. "We'll be in touch," he said, and left. In the week that followed, the west car behaved. People used it to go to their floors and stepped off without a stumble. The east car lagged sometimes, but nothing more. The footage from Monday night stayed in the system, and the copy on the detective's drive did too, I assume. We all decided to treat the whole thing like the kind of story you tell the new janitor to see if he scares easy. The building likes myths because they feel like traditions, and tradition is just paperwork with better handwriting. 2 things kept happening. The first, every night at 021407, the West Lift 2F feed would drop 3 frames. It was a tiny hiccup. If you didn't know to look, you wouldn't. The second, sometimes when I stood in the elevator by myself, riding from 1 to 3 with my cart, the car would stop an inch low and the doors would open, and nothing would be wrong except I would feel the smallest tug on my belt, like a child trying to get my attention. I never looked down when I felt it. I stared at the floor number and waited for the tug to let go. Farah called a meeting with night staff and told us to document any anomalies using the new portal on the internal site. The portal asked for time and floor and a description. It had a drop-down for type of fluid if there was fluid. The options were water, oil, unknown, and other. After you submitted, the page generated a ticket number that began with DS. The tickets resolved themselves in a queue that always said, "In progress." It was the most government thing I have ever seen. On Thursday, a woman from Records stopped me near the stairwell and asked if the West car was safe. Her eyes were red, and she had the look of someone who had read too many files about people and was leaking. "It's safe," I said, and she nodded as if she'd known I would say that. She took the stairs. Friday night, I found the red dot next to the West feed again. The system had flagged it. Instead of the lobby, the thumbnail showed a gray rectangle with static and a small white blur at the center. I clicked. The video played as if someone had dragged a magnet across the screen. For 5 seconds, there was nothing but snow. Then, the image resolved to a person standing in the lobby alone. The timestamp said 01:44:22. The person wore my uniform. You couldn't see the face. The sound, when I turned it up, was only the elevator's low breath, steady and patient, like a thing that could wait forever. I saved that clip to the drive and didn't tell anyone. It felt like stealing a page out of a file I shouldn't read. That night, riding up alone, the car shuddered between 2 and 3 and stopped. The light inside dimmed a little. The floor indicator blinked between numbers like it didn't want to pick. I pressed door open and it beeped at me. I pressed it again. The beep was patient in a way that made me angry. I pressed the emergency call and got nothing but the hum. I thought about how people die in elevators, how they sometimes jump, which is useless, how they sometimes press all the buttons, which is also useless. I stood perfectly still, then leaned my weight gently toward the seam, the way you do on a train when you want to feel the track. The seam was cool. I put my ear to it. I heard that paper-on-paper sound, but under it, something else, like a breath taken too shallow and too late. It released. The car slid the distance of a shoe sole and leveled with 3. The doors opened. The lobby was empty. I rolled my card out and told myself it was nothing. People get stuck sometimes. Machines pause. That's all. 2 nights later, Khan came back with a folder. He set it on the security desk and told me a thing I already knew from the shape of his mouth. The old incident from 3 years ago had produced a batch of weird footage too. The man's name was in the report. He had moved to a different department, then quit. The footage from that night had been reviewed, and the review notes described repeating visual artifacts. It said they were most significant between 0212 and 0220. His report described the cameras as showing a death that didn't happen. Khan stared at the words like they were a math problem. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, because that is the question people like me ask people like him when we want an instruction that will make the world logical. "Don't die in it," he said. He tried to make it a joke. It sounded like a hope. He asked if I had ever seen my own face on the feed. I told him no. I didn't tell him about the clip where the person raised a hand to the camera. I didn't tell him that the first letter on the name tag had stopped looking like M and started looking like a mirror of itself, like the camera had printed the image backward, and now the letters made no sense at all. Last week I filed a ticket, DS 42017, because the West car doors trembled like someone was pushing them from the inside when the lobby was empty. The ticket says "in progress." The red dot appears on the feed some nights and not others. The drips come and go. There hasn't been a body. The police case is open, no incident. The building prefers phrases like that. I'm writing this at the security desk because Tariq called in sick and asked me to watch the monitors while I take my break. It's 12:47. The hum sounds like a refrigerator that never cycles off. The air smells like paper and metal, and a little like the inside of a pocket. If I look up, I can see myself in the reflection of the monitor, small and bent, the way people look when they try to make themselves into less of a target. I know how this all sounds. I know people will say it's a story. At 2, I'll stand up and decide to walk to the second floor lobby to prove there is nothing to see. I will tell myself I am the kind of person who looks. I will take the stairs, because the east car always stalls at 1 just when you need it not to. I will stand in front of the west doors with the out-of-service sign leaning on its leg, and I will feel a draft from the seam like a breath that is not mine. I will think of the man from 3 years ago and of the way the building keeps time wrong, and of the way some places learn your name. Maybe I won't go. Maybe I will sit here and press the save button on every frame between 0212 and 0220, and then walk out at 6 and never come back. Maybe the little tug on my belt will be nothing more than static. Maybe the thing in the seam will not have the patience to wait for me if I don't go to meet it. I tell myself that as if patience could be used up. The hum has changed a little. If I close my eyes, it sounds like rubber breathing. The clock on the wall is 2 minutes slow again. The system time on the monitor says 02.13:09. The West Lift 2F thumbnail has the red dot next to it. Already, as if the machine can see the future in a way the rest of us only feel on the back of our necks. If you read this later, and there was an article about a janitor found between floors, maybe the footage will show you something. Maybe it will show you me. Maybe it will do that thing where it pretends not to show a face and then shows you anyway. Maybe you will think you see me raise a hand and press a palm to the lens, which is impossible, and you will tell yourself it was a trick of the light. Or maybe the story will be nothing at all. Maybe there will be no article. Maybe the building will keep the loop for itself and play it back only to the walls. It's 02:14. The indicator above the west doors toggles and holds. The seam in the monitor shivers. The first drop gathers, thinking hard about whether to fall. I'm going to save this now. If I stand up after and go look, that will be my mistake to make. If I don't, Then there will be an empty lobby on the screen and a hum in the walls and a relief that will feel like a lie. Either way, the camera will keep watching. Either way, the building will keep time the way it prefers. Either way, someone will sign something in the morning to say that nothing happened at all. I didn't grow up in the 60s, but my mother did. And when I was a kid, she used to point at the boarded-up brick building on Kettle Street and say, "That was Crowell and Rose. You could buy your whole life in there." She'd talk about the perfume counter and the bargain basement and how at Christmas, the escalators smelled like cinnamon oil. What she never mentioned until I was older was the elevator. The store had one of those old caged cars with an accordion gate and a brass handle, the kind that needed a person to stand there and work the lever. The rumor, she said, was that people would step inside with the operator and arrive alone. Ask the store about it and they'd get annoyed and say they never had an operator, only automatic cars, which makes no sense if you've ever seen the elevator. There's a little stool in the corner worn down to a polished circle. Someone sat there a lot. In 2019, a developer leased the property for a heritage pop-up to test if the building could still draw a crowd. I got hired for temp work through a staffing agency, stock room, light cleaning, watching that nobody pulled off the velvet ropes. I shouldn't have cared as much as I did, but I liked the building. The lobby had a high stained ceiling with flaking gold paint and a clock that never moved off 7:12. The elevator sat at the back in a marble alcove like a small stage set, with a semicircle indicator over the door labeled BLM234. The edges of the letters were nicked from decades of no one, tapping them with a thumbnail. We had a modern freight lift in the alley, but customers begged to gawk at the old cage like it was an animal in a museum. We kept the gate closed and a velvet rope across with a sign, "Not in use." People leaned anyway. The bell would ding sometimes, even with the power to the car disconnected on the breaker panel. The building engineer blamed capacitors' bleeding noise, and everyone nodded like that was a normal sentence. The crew I worked with was small. Mina, a grad student picking up shifts, wore chipped red nail polish and carried a tiny notebook for overheard weirdness. Mr. Khan, security, had worked night shifts in half the old buildings in this city and had a collection of keys that looked like a small wind chime. Our manager, Phyllis, had that retail voice that sounds cheerful even when she's telling you she's disappointed. There were background characters, the seasonal kids who took selfies in the hat department, the older women who came in to breathe the place like it was church, but those three were my daily orbit. And maybe one more. The first day I had the closing shift alone in the lobby. An older lady with a cloth shopping bag came in before sunset. Her shoes made a hollow sound on the marble. She touched the rope at the elevator and asked if we were short-staffed tonight. I said no, and she said, "All right, I can wait," and stood off to the side like she was waiting her turn at a bus stop. When I told her the car wasn't operating, she tilted her head. "Then who's running it this afternoon?" I said, "Nobody." She smiled at me in a way that made me feel like I was the one missing something basic. "Well, he's very polite, soft voice. Calls the floors like an announcer. Tell him his cuff is unraveling." She lifted her bag and left. I watched her walk away and told myself she'd confused us with somewhere else. It was easier than thinking about the bell I could swear I'd heard 5 times that hour when the breaker was off. There is a trick buildings play when they're old. They make you feel like a later draft of something. For the first week we chalked little anomalies up to that. Mr. Khan would lock the lobby doors and walk the street side and come back to find the gate pushed an inch. Mina said the elevator indicator pointed itself at M at exactly 6 p.m., even if she'd moved it by hand to L while dusting. A little boy on Saturday asked his dad why the man in the hat didn't move when they waved. We all laughed. People see things. The mind edits. Still, I started to notice the smell near the alcove around evening. Not mildew, not old dust exactly, but a kind of barbershop cologne, bay rum, and something metallic underneath like coins warmed by a palm. When the pop-up was 2 weeks in, Phyllis found the old safety binder in a filing cabinet in the mezzanine office. It was brittle and over-indexed, the kind of manual that begs to be misfiled. The page about the elevator said the same thing twice on 2 different forms. automatic after June 1958, and then, in smaller type on a separate memo, all manual operators, discontinued. Below that, a typed line that looked copied and recopied, until the letters fuzzed. Operator 0, do not schedule. In handwriting, who the hell is 0? With 3 question marks. Phyllis rolled her eyes at me like funny old paperwork and used a paperclip to fasten the page down so, guess wouldn't pocket it. We started getting comments. People paid for vintage lipstick and said things like, so nice to bring the elevator guy back, it sets the mood. A man dropped a receipt at the register and said, without looking up, the operator's as old as the fixtures. It's retail, you nod, you say, right? But the way they said it was never like a joke. It was like how you say the weather's nice. When I'd ask what he looked like, they'd squint. Hard to see, they'd say. Uniform cap. He hums the tune from the jingle. You know the jingle? And they'd sing a few bars of a song none of us had heard. Mina would write it down and hum it back, and it never matched the next person's version. But each time the bell would ding from inside the alcove as if someone was answering a call and then changing their mind. Our freight elevator in the alley worked fine. That's what we used to move boxes. Around closing, we'd get calls from upstairs on the walkie to bring up more hangers or drop a register till, and it was routine. Key the mic, say copy, roll the cart. The old cage sat like a closed eye behind its rope. One night, carrying a plastic tub of scarves, I found the rope unclipped, and the accordion gate folded in like a mouth mid-word. The car's light was on, a small, dusty glass bulb in the ceiling, and I saw the stool in the corner and the polished circle the size of a plate. It made my brain supply a person in that space the way a crossword makes you supply the word. I turned off the light and pulled the gate and looped the rope. It slid back an inch against my fingers, stubborn like a pet. No, I said out loud, and locked the second hook, which no one ever used because it stuck, and went to the alley to take the freight. If you want the part where you don't feel safe anymore, it was the night Mina and I did the count after close, and the bell from the old car rang 9 times in a row. It was a frantic little sound, not polite at all, like someone jabbing the button. Mr. Khan poked his head from the stairwell with his keys in his fist. We are off, he said, meaning break her off. And I said I knew that, and we stood in a triangle and listened to something that shouldn't exist continue existing. After the 9th ring, it stopped. We did the count fast, wrong twice, laughed out of sync. Before we left, I put my hand against the gate because I needed to know if it was warm. It wasn't. But the brass had a handprint on it the size of a child's. And I wiped it with my sleeve because the idea that anyone would see it felt like embarrassing the building. You can say that it had to happen eventually, and you're right, but it didn't happen the way I expected. I thought it'd be a customer who dragged us into it. A kid stepping under the rope, a grandparent in a mood. But it was a Wednesday at the end of the month and the rain had kept everybody home. Phyllis sent Mina upstairs to check a leak in the ceiling above the housewares display and sent me to the alley for more paper bags. Mr. Khan went downstairs to silence a motion detector that kept tripping in the basement light well. The lobby went the kind of quiet that is more like pressure than silence. In that pressure, the bell in the old elevator rang once, and then there was a tiny shift in the air like a held breath let go. The indicator clicked from L to M. The light inside the car came on with a tired glow. The gate peeled itself a hand's breadth and stopped. Here's where I could have gone to the alley and used the freight. I could have called Phyllis on the walkie and told her to stop me. Instead, I set the bags down by the register and walked to the rope. I unclipped it, and it settled against my shin like the tail of an animal. I don't know if I thought I was going to prove something to myself or to the building. I slid the gate back and stepped inside before I could make it dramatic. The floor dipped the smallest amount, just enough to say, yes, wait. The small stool in the corner, the polished circle, was to my right. The control was a curved brass, handle with a bakelite grip, and a felt-lined sign above it read, "Do not touch." I didn't. I folded the gate. It shut with a sound I hadn't given the building credit for, a precise click that felt like a promise. Which floor? It wasn't in my ear or in my head. It was where it should have been, in the doorway. standing where the stool's shadow fell. A man about my height, thin, in a dark jacket that wasn't quite a suit, with a peaked cap. You'd think a ghost, would be lace and fog. He looked like a photograph brought to life, less color than everything around him but edged in the building's own shadow. I saw the cuff everyone had mentioned, a ravel of thread at his wrist. He didn't look at me. It felt like he looked past me to the doors, to the marble behind the gate, already planning the stop. 2, I said, because that's where Mina was, and he put his hand on the handle and moved it, notched a hair, and the floor tilted forward like a held tray. The bell inside the car now dinged to itself as the indicator needle swung. We didn't rise fast. It was the kind of lift that makes you aware of each floor as a suggestion. Between floors, the light trembled as if the bulb didn't like the ride. At M, we should have seen the chandelier and the band of boxed gloves. But instead the gate stuttered and the car slowed, and I saw a sliver of a different mezzanine. Through the diamond holes, a counter with 3 cash registers the size of toasters. A chain at ankle height where no chain has ever been. A clerk in a skirt with her back to us tapping totals into one register and not making a sound. I breathed in and smelled the faint shock of matches. The operator did not call the floor. He watched the gap as if judging traffic. He didn't hum, not then, but he did something with his mouth like he wanted to. 2, I said again, and he tilted the lever. The car continued up. The indicator passed M and moved between 2 and something, labeled O that I had never noticed before. The bell dinged once, half-hearted. When the car stopped, the gate refused to fold all the way back at first and then did with a shrug. We were on the 2nd floor, and we weren't. The glass cases were there, the tables of towels, but the aisle markers were wooden and handwritten. And somewhere someone was calling numbers like at a deli, only the numbers were not in order. Mina wasn't in sight. There were more people than we'd had all day. A line of customers drifted past the gate and didn't register the car or me or the man. They had the distracted faces of shoppers in photographs. One kid in a wool cap looked right at me and then darted his eyes down to the gray rubber floor of the elevator, the way a kid does when he's not supposed to meet strangers. Eyes. I could have stepped off and found the stairs and walked down and told myself I'd hallucinated. I stayed where I was because the operator hadn't moved and because the shape of his stillness told me there were rules I didn't know yet. He put his palm out flat and I put mine against it without thinking. The way you might offer a hand to a steadying rail when a train lurches. His hand felt like a heavy coat hanging from a hook. The idea of weight, heat stored long ago. When he took his hand back, I saw a stamp on my palm I hadn't felt applied. APR 12. 1966 in small purple. Block letters, double-struck like the person with the stamp had been careful. I put my thumb on it. The ink didn't smear. Basement, he said softly, like we were already going there. No, I said, and it came out weaker than I wanted. The customers in view gingerly picked up towels and put them down again. An employee in a cardigan wrote something on a pad with a pencil and blew at it, and the graphite dust rose and did not knock. He tipped his head toward the indicator, toward the letter O. This car goes down. I thought about the lever and the breakable world of floors under us and about the way my voice sounded inside the car compared to outside it. Lobby, I said. Please. He nodded once. There was no boredom in the nod and no irritation. It felt somehow like a compliment. You had remembered a word. He moved the handle backwards. The car eased down and the bell ticked twice as we passed M and then L. I expected the gate to catch on the chain, or the velvet rope, or the century of grudges this building held, but it opened as smooth as a well-oiled lie. The lobby was the lobby again, our lobby, our sign, our scuffed welcome mat, and empty. The clock above the alcove said 7:12. I could hear the far hum of the street. Mina called my name from the mezzanine stairwell. Her voice sounded like a voice in a modern building. I turned back to thank the man because apparently I am nice to specters the way I am nice to people who hold doors, and the car was unoccupied. The stool looked like it had never been used, and the bulb breathed twice and went out, and the brassy scent folded into the colder smells of concrete and mop water. I touched my palm, and the stamp tingled, not like heat, but like the way your tongue remembers a word you can't place. I slid the gate closed and hooked the rope and checked the second hook and crossed the lobby, with the feeling you have when you're stepping off a boat that has stopped moving. Mina stood halfway down the mezzanine stairs with a rag in her hand. She looked pale. "Where did you go?" she asked, urgent like I'd run off in the middle of a sentence. "I just heard the bell and it came down empty. Mr. Khan is looking for you in the basement. Phyllis thought you were in the alley. I called your phone and it went straight to voicemail. Did you?" She stopped and her eyes went to my hand. "What is that?" I looked. The stamp was crisp. The date was wrong in every direction it could be wrong. "Ink," I said, and showed her palm to palm like that meant anything. "I was right here, 2 minutes." 17, she said, breathing through her nose like she was pushing something heavy. 17 minutes because I watched the clock and then I stopped watching it. Do not go in there again. She said it like I was a toddler near a pond. She was shaking, a small, fine tremble. We stayed late to humor Mr. Khan, who wanted to check that the basement motion sensor was a real thing and not, as he put it, a mouse with a grievance. He found the sensor in perfect shape and a footprint in the dust near the light well that could have been a maintenance boot or a trick of the sloughing plaster. He didn't notice the matchbook that had fallen between 2 boxes. I did when he turned to lock the cage door. It was blue cardboard cracked at the fold, printed with a coffee cup and the words, "Blue Canary, Kettle and Third," and inside, in ink that had browned, someone had written, "Keep your ticket," in small, neat letters. I put it back where I found it because I didn't want to know whether it would still be there in the morning if I took it. The next few days taught me a trick about talking around things. Phyllis sent a memo asking staff not to encourage fanciful lore in front of customers. Mr. Khan took to walking past the alcove and tapping the rope with a knuckle as if to test its mood. Mina checked my palm every shift. The stamp faded and came back and faded again like a bruise under different light. Customers kept saying they liked the operator. A teenage girl asked what his name was, and when I said we didn't have an operator, she laughed like I was doing a bit. An older man told me he had known him when he himself was a stock boy. "Decent fellow," he said. "Knew to wait for stragglers. You could hear him coming. The car had a tone." Then he frowned. "They said they'd automated, but you can't automate knowing when to wait." On the last weekend, a family came in with a grandfather who wore a hat like an actor playing a grandfather. He had slow knees and a quick hand on the rail. When they reached the alcove, he stopped so fast the grandson bumped him. He tilted his head as if he were hearing a far radio. "Don't get in," he said, almost conversational, and then shook his head. "No, that's not right. It's not for us anymore." He reached into his coat and took something out and looked at it in his palm, and then closed his fist around it again and put it back in his pocket. No one in his family noticed that he'd done any of that. He smiled at me with tears in his eyes and said, "They still don't call him by name." We closed on a Tuesday. Pop-ups have a way of ending like traveling shows, quietly. The developer said maybe spring. We boxed the unsold towels and mirrors and bagged the hangers. The escalator motors groaned for the last time. Phyllis hugged us and said, "Don't be strangers." Mr. Khan locked the doors behind us and leaned into the glass so he could see the reflection of the empty lobby and the darker rectangle of the elevator alcove. "There is always one person," he said to nobody in particular. "In every building, the extra person, the one who belongs to the building instead of to the time." I didn't ask him if he meant a person like a security guard or like an operator. He wouldn't have answered in a way that made anything easier. At home, I put the shirts I'd worn those weeks in the wash, and the blue matchbook fell out of the pocket of my gray hoodie even though I hadn't taken it. My brain tried to write an explanation. Someone slipped it in, the box jostled, and then hit a wall. I put the matchbook on the counter and didn't open it and went to wash my hands. The water made the stamp on my palm flare purple and then go faint again. I went back to the matchbook and opened it and found the same 2 words, "Keep your ticket," and a single match with a white head like chalk. The striker on the cover was unworn. Since then, little things. I live on the 6th floor of a building with an elevator that fakes modernity with a silver panel but has the bones of something older. Sometimes, late, when the building is quiet, the bell doesn't ding so much as clear its throat, and the indicator jumps from 1 to something that isn't a number before settling on 6 like it decided at the last second to behave. In the mirror inside my elevator, I have seen twice a cap brim in the corner of the frame like an old photograph left there by accident. I tell myself that's nothing. I tell myself a lot of things. I went by the Kettle Street building last month because I wanted to see if they'd scraped the old paint off the ceiling yet. The glass doors were dusted and the lobby dim. The clock still said 7:12. Through the doors, I could see the rope in the alcove hooked twice. The light in the car was off. I stood with one hand against the cool glass and watched my own reflection try to look like someone with any sense. A bus went by and my mirror self flickered across the doors. When the bus noise faded, I heard it. The small metallic cough of the bell from inside that closed building. Not loud, like you'd hear it if you were meant to and miss it if you weren't. The indicator didn't move. I did what any rational person would do, which is walk away quickly and then, not rational at all, I came back and pressed my ear once to the seam of the door to catch the sound of the motor that shouldn't be able to start. There was nothing. Just the city being big, just my heart making the skin behind my ear feel strange. Last week I woke at 7:12 a.m. to my phone buzzing with a number I didn't know. I don't answer unknown numbers before coffee, so I let it go and it didn't leave a message. 2 minutes later, a text came through with nothing in the body, just a photo attachment. It was black at first glance, then the black resolved into the shiny dark inside of the elevator gate as if the camera had been pressed up to it. The image had that washed sepia of an old print, even though it was just digital noise. And in the corner of the frame you could see the edge of a uniform sleeve, and at the bottom you could see a hand, mine or not, pressed to a chest pocket. When I zoomed in, the pocket had a small tag stitched through it with a safety pin, held for pickup, RM, and beneath that, in smaller letters, operator. I deleted the photo, which didn't help. I keep hearing the bell now in places that shouldn't have bells. In the grocery store when the backroom door opens. In the hallway of my building when the stairwell door swings slow. On the radio when the announcer takes a breath. I don't step into elevators without looking for the polished ring on the floor where a stool might have been. I don't press B for basement, not even in buildings where B means parking. I keep the matchbook in a drawer and I don't touch it except when I do, which is often, just to feel the small rectangle of it like a ticket I didn't buy. I know how this sounds, that I'm priming myself. We teach ourselves to see what we expect to see. But here's a thing I can't file under imagination. Last night my door buzzer went while I was brushing my teeth and I patted out with toothpaste foam in my mouth and pressed the talk button and the static cleared and a voice I recognize said, soft as the elevator at Kettle and 3rd, lobby. It wasn't my building's hissy intercom voice. It wasn't any voice of anyone I know. It was the tone you use when you've already thrown the lever and the car is moving and you're warning the people who can still change their minds. I didn't hit the button to release the door. I didn't speak. I stood there with my palm over the speaker and watched the second hand on the microwave stutter forward and stop and stutter forward again. The buzzer stayed quiet. The matchbook in the drawer in the kitchen clicked once like cardboard rubbed by a thumb. I swallowed toothpaste and breathed bay rum and copper and the faint sulfur that comes right before a match flares. There's a line in the memo in the safety binder that I didn't show you, because it didn't make sense when I read it and it only makes the wrong kind of sense now. It says, "Do not schedule operator 0. He is not on payroll. He will show up anyway." I think about that when I pass a building with a brass-lined alcove. I think about it when my elevator arrives and no one is inside, and I step forward and feel the smallest dip of the floor. I think about the fact that the stamp on my palm shows up on mornings I can't remember what I dreamed. APR 12, 1966, dark for an hour, and then fading to a rumor. I won't tell you where Crowell and Rose stood because it isn't about that building. The extra person belongs to the building, Mr. Khan said, but the building changes. People move. We're all drafts, later and later versions. Maybe there was an operator once, a real man with a cap and a radio voice and a knack for waiting, and maybe he logged enough trips to carry the car from one kind of time to another by pure habit. Maybe he never existed in any way you could put in a memo. Either way, he's been doing his job longer than anyone's kept the books. He knows to stop for stragglers. He knows the words to call. He knows how to look past you, the way an elevator operator does when he's watching the doors and not your face. Tonight, my neighbor asked if I'd noticed the elevator was being weird. Like it waits for someone who isn't there, she said, laughing. We stood in the hall and listened to the motor lower itself to the lobby and the soft catch of the gate in some other memory of metal. When the car arrived and the doors opened, we didn't step in. It stood there like a held breath, the lamp in its ceiling a small, tired sun. The doors didn't close. We waited, and the doors waited, and then there was the faintest shape of someone sitting where no stool has ever been, a shadow cast by nothing, the polished circle you can only see if you're looking. My neighbor said, "After you," out of reflex, and the bell dinged once like a laugh, and the operator, who never worked and will never stop, tipped the lever toward down. We both stood still and let the car go without us. It slid shut and lowered itself into a place we don't have a button for, and when it came back, the indicator paused just for a breath. On a letter that isn't on the panel in my building or in any of the buildings I've known. I locked my door and checked my drawers and looked at my palm, which was clean. Then as I turned out the light, the purple rose through the skin as if the ink had been waiting under there all day. I pressed my hand to my chest pocket without meaning to, like I was making sure something didn't fall. The bell sounded once, very soft, somewhere below me, and never decided to ring again. If you hear it, if you ever step into a car and smell old cologne and warm coins and the air leans forward like a held tray, say the word lobby like you mean it. Don't look at his face. Don't reach for the lever. Keep your ticket. And don't be surprised if you arrive alone and the store tells you no one was ever employed. It's not a lie exactly. It's just the way some jobs work.